My name is Jae Hwan Lee. I'm the curator of the exhibition Humming to the Sound of Fear, currently held at Helen J Gallery in Hollywood. Today, we are welcoming three wonderful panelists, Namhee Lee, Jongdae Kim, and Jae Hwan Lim. Namhee Lee is an associate professor of modern Korean history at the University of California, Los Angeles, Department of Asian Language and Culture. He also serves as a director of the UCLA Center for Korean Studies. She's currently working on a book project entitled Social Memory and Public History in South Korea. Her publications include The Making of Minjung, Democracy and the Politics of Representation in South Korea, published by Cornell University Press in 2007. Jongdae Kim is the co-founder and executive director of the Regeneration Movement. He founded the organization with a mission to educate diasporic youth, refugees, and immigrants. Kim is a descendant of a former South Korean president, Kim Dae-jung, and his family temporarily sought asylum in the US from the 1970s to 80s. Kim has recently organized the annual Diaspora Dialogue, which aimed to practice universal humanism through diasporic consciousness. Jae Hwan Lim is an artist activist focusing on human rights and the struggles for democracy in the Korean Peninsula. He's a founder and director of Humans of North Korea, an organization advocating for North Korean defectors and global citizenships. Lim is currently working on a long-term social practice project called Korea, while it's with the parentheses with Korea, while experiencing physical and ideological borders and finding the political meaning of being Korean in contemporary society. Lim is also the artist of the video we will watch tonight and has two wonderful paintings of Mountain Kumgang in the exhibition Humming to the Sound of Fear. To learn more about the exhibition, please visit helenjgallery.com. Without further ado, we're now going to start the screening. Welcome back, everyone. And thank you, Jae, for your wonderful work. I have so many thoughts and questions in my head. But before I do, I want to ask Namhee and Jongdae what you both thought about the work, if you don't mind asking.
I was blown away by first of all, the beauty of the drawings and the warmth of the colors. And, you know, I mean, there's so many interesting issues that we can discuss about this video, but it also made me think about how this particular kind of sort of way to narrate one's memory through paintings could be a democratizing way of telling a story and to document one's memory that could possibly remain in one's sort of a personal and private, right? But by presenting as drawings. I mean, I actually, when I was first told that there would be this video presentation, I was actually thinking, you know, this sort of usual documentary that one usually sees in this kind of situations. I was pleasantly surprised, and you know, there are so many sort of potential. There are so many possibilities that we can think of in terms of utilizing this way of narrating stories and also excavating one's personal memories into and bringing into public domain. I was also quite struck by the fact that Jae Hwan's mother had engaged in this kind of conversation with the North Korean guide, and that the fact that the Jae Hwan also remembered about this, how precocious he must have been, because given, I mean, I don't know exactly how old he is, but he must have been perhaps younger than 10 or so. And so the fact that he accompanied his mother to this trip, and that the mother also engaged in this conversation, I just, that was just, that gave me a shiver. And this is precisely the kind of things that we've been talking about in terms of how, for example, in terms of the sort of psychic of the Korean people, despite, again, the state policy throughout post-1945 South Korean history, that how for Koreans, North Korea is not necessarily the enemy, the adversary and military, you know, the figure of this sort of demonic figure that's been that's often been portrayed as by mass media, and especially in the United States. And so in some ways, and again, I don't know anything about Jae Hwan's personal background and his parents' personal background, but that story just captures, again, the potentiality and the possibility when the Korean people are given the opportunity to engage with North Korea and to embrace North Koreans, despite, again, all of the difficulties that still stand in terms of reconciliation between North and South Korea. So I thought this was just so beautifully done. I would like to personally thank you for making this video and for thinking about this. It's just simply marvelous. I wish we can go on to talk about it, but I'm sure other people have a lot more interesting things to say. But that's just my short piece for now.
Yeah, and I also agree with Professor Namhee Lee that, you know, this is such a beautifully done, you know, the storytelling is so warm, and, you know, it actually kind of like, for me, it resonated a lot when with, you know, I didn't have a chance to visit Kumgang Mountain when it was open, but I did have a chance to visit Pyongyang. So maybe this is for another time and another story to go in depth, but like a lot of the sentiments that Jae Hwan was feeling, like it really resonated a lot with me, especially about the misperceptions about North Korea. Because, like, you know, my dad always, you know, used to tell me that, you know, like, and, you know, several others in his generation as well, that, you know, how they really believe that, you know, when they think of like North Koreans, they literally believe they had like horns on their foreheads, because that's how they were taught. And, you know, like, we had, you know, so many misperceptions about North Koreans, but when the actual encounters happens, that's when the stereotypes break. And that's when the misperceptions break. And when the true relations, it was just like a short, very short conversation, but that short conversation is even so revealing about each other, right? So, and it's also revealing about how we were so misinformed about each other. So I think peace, you know, peace actually is about like people, and peace starts from the realization that despite all the differences that we have and all the conflicts that we have with each other, we are still, and we are part of the same human race. And that is where we kind of begin from. So that was one point that kind of resonated with me. Another point that I thought was really important in this work was the symbolism of curtain. And maybe it kind of connects with the previous point, but like how you picked out the curtain as kind of like the symbol during the trip. I think that was very like powerful, because, you know, like, by putting on a curtain, although you're in a North Korean territory, by doing so, you're kind of barred from seeing what's actually out there, and you're only allowed to see what you are allowed to see. So I think that has been, you know, like how things have been, you know, our view toward North Korea has always been really partial. And we only saw in part both, you know, both in active sense and passive sense. Actively because South Korea and the West chose to see North Korea in their own certain ways, and passively because North Korea has a very strict control over how they are seen to the outside world. So they control very meticulously like what they are showing to the outside world. So I think that was a very important symbolism in the piece. Mm-hmm. So, but thank you for the great artwork.
Thank you, Namhee and Jongdae. Like, I had such a similar kind of impression after watching the video. I think we all agree about this, like, this moment of realization. There's like that like North Koreans are actually like people, or that like there's like a lot of misrepresentation of North Koreans, or just like kind of gross generalization of people there. But also, yeah, like going back to what you sort of commented, Namhee, about kind of the democratic or this like bringing of personal experiences, exceptional personal experiences, like, you know, people who got to go to like Mountain Kumgang or visiting Pyongyang, like how like, yeah, like this kind of like sits as like a form of art, you know, in the form of art. And yeah, it like delivers like a story that's like highly unusual than what we usually experience. And I also like agreed so much about the symbolism of the curtain, and sort of I had that thought while watching that video as well, and just like how even thinking about like the space inside the bus and how it is like somewhere that you sort of like sit down and like moves together. It's like the veil kind of moves with you together. It's like almost like a theater, but also like a veil. I like definitely agree with that part. And maybe let's like turn to our artist. And my first question is, I guess, like what prompted you to make an artwork about Mountain Kumgang from the first place? And what were your experiences and interaction with nature and people there?
Wow, thank you. I really want to thank the gallery and John for co-organizing this event with me. And thank you again, Professor Namhee and Jongdae, and also the audiences who joined us today, generously joining us tonight. I also really appreciate both of the speakers' read of my work, because it's very rare and meaningful to hear about my art from people of non-art backgrounds. So it's very meaningful to hear from you. So back to your questions. Actually, there are a lot of things to touch upon here. So my artworks on Mount Kumgang, including the video that we just watched, are part of my memory from a collective experience caused by a national policy. So I am, as the beneficiary of the South Korean government's sunshine policy, which Professor Namhee or Jongdae might go over later, I had the chance to visit Mount Kumgang in North Korea around 2004. That's actually around when I was 9 or 10 years old. So you got it right, Namhee. But after 4 years later, this opportunity was banned until today, after North Korean soldiers shot a South Korean tourist under very mysterious circumstances. And the conservative South Korean Lee Myung-bak government at that time very radically decided to halt all the relations with North Korea, right? So having seen and also built relationships with a lot of North Korean defectors since then, a lot of them actually shared their experiences, some, you know, in the very open public or very privately with me. I, at the same time, questioned if my visit to the mountain actually held validity whenever I spoke about North Korea. I, of course, didn't go to every part of the country, and I didn't live as North Korean, so I can't say what's real and what's false. But I definitely sought the need to track back my memory and visually try to archive it before it fades away, as I cannot revisit the time and also the actual location because of the political reasons. So the mountain, as we all know, is considered as the most beautiful mountains in the Korean Peninsula, and it's even translated directly as that Diamond Mountain, right? And I vividly remember the clear water stream that I walked along the trail, and the vast, vast green rocky mountains that overwhelmed me, especially feeling that as a very young primary student. As the video depicted, the North Korean people who I met on the trip were very ordinary people. They were literally humans, right? So even if they had Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-il badges on their chest, they were still people like us, to me, even as a younger being at the time. So I think the video actually covered and shared most of my memorable moments, so I won't really reiterate too much about it. But the time I spent there for a week or so really impacted my perception of North Korean people and nature. So I sometimes kind of wonder how I would have perceived North Korea these days if I didn't have that experience, very unique chance of visiting the mountain. I perhaps might have also had all these prejudices like any other people who are very exclusively, critical on North Korea without having had the chance to visit the country or met a single North Korean people. So still my face-to-face conversation and interaction with North Koreans kind of prove the criticality of more peaceful gestures that allow more communication with the humans of North Korea at large.
Thank you for that. And speaking of this sort of like exceptional experience, Jongdae, you sort of mentioned your sort of short visit at in North Korea, in Pyongyang, you said it, right? And I kind of wanted to ask you like a similar question. Like, how was your experience there? Like what was your sort of visit about? And do you think do you think you had like a similar experience as Jae?
Similar, but also a bit of different. So to give you a little more background, I was there in December of 2011, and there was when Kim Jong-il died, and me and my family, along with my grandmother and my father and my uncle and aunt, we were visiting there as a civil delegation to North Korea, because when my grandfather passed away, Kim Jong-il had sent delegation to mourn death of my grandfather. So it was a very tense situation. It was during Lee Myung-bak regime, and like things were getting really bad after, especially the shelling of the Yeonpyeong Island, and it was very tense. So maybe the government couldn't officially really like make a statement about Kim Jong-il's death, but it was sort of a kind of like a lowered risk gesture of, I guess, like reconciliation. So I was glad to be part of that delegation to Pyongyang. So that is how I visited Pyongyang. But and there are so many things that I can share about. But one of the things that really was striking was seeing the North Korean soldiers on the border, because I served in the South Korean military from 2007 to 2009. And it was only like 2 years after I was out of the military. Mm-hmm. And, like North Korean soldiers would be my main enemies that I would, like if a war breaks out, like I would literally have to like shoot them. And, like like my nightly shift duties while I was a soldier was to be on a surveillance for possible aggressions. So, they, like North Korean soldiers, were my enemies. But I crossed the DMZ, and then I was on the North Korean side, and the North Korean soldiers were like stopping and then saluting at our bus. So that was like really striking, because like 2 years ago they were enemies, but now they're like showing respect to us. And it was kind of a very weird feeling and a realization that maybe people say that I think like the division, it can be very like it is really in our imagination, because like in reality we're just same human beings, but like our imagination and the situation makes us enemies. And now here we're not enemies anymore, and they're saluting at me. So it was a very striking experience for me. So it really depends on what kind of lens you put on to look at them.
Right. And just also kind of, I'm noticing the difference between like the kind of context, like 2004 when Jae was in Mountain Kumgang was a very specific time in Korean history, versus like when you were at in Pyongyang. I feel like that was like a very totally different context as well. And I'm so glad that we have a historian specialized in Korean history here. And I wanted to sort of ask you, Namhee, to provide us like with more context, like how was 2004 different than 2011, December of 2011, and yeah.
Yeah, John, you're absolutely right about the significant difference between 2004 when Jae Hwan visited Kumgang Mountain as part of the Kumgang Mountain project that was initiated both by Kim Dae-jung and later Nomuyan governments, and Jongdae's visit later in 2011. I don't know how much time we have, but just to make the long story very, very short, as everyone, I think everyone here would know what the Sunshine Policy was all about. Again, just to put it very, very briefly, until Kim Dae-jung government's Sunshine Policy, Kim Dae-jung came into power in December 1997 and assumed the presidency in February of 1998. But prior to becoming president, he had been very actively promoting this idea of reconciliation with North Korea. So even after he failed to gain presidency in 1992, and when he moved to London, he was already talking about with the political leaders there, again, what we later came to know as Sunshine Policy. And as, again, many of you would know, this is based on a Aesop fable where the sun is basically competing with the wind as to who's going to be able to take off the winter coat of this passerby. And it turned out it was the warm ray of the sun that managed to take off the jacket and not the blistering wind. And so the idea was that it is through mutual exchange of not only the cultural, but also economic and cooperation between two Koreas that would, and to help North Korea access international community in terms of economic aids and whatnot. All of these things would eventually bring about, again, a reunification. So in previous administrations, going all the way back to Park Chung-hee, there have been attempts to obviously to bring about dialogue and some level of cooperation, but it is the first time that actually through economic aid and economic cooperation that, again, the reconciliation was attempted. And as Jae Hwan's visit to Kumgang Mountain proves, there were various kinds of activities that came out of this Sunshine Policy. And one of the things that we have to remember is that the perception of North Korea by the South Koreans drastically changed. It was radically changed, that North Koreans were no longer one-dimensional figure. As many of you already said, it was North Korea was no longer enemy, but a partner, political, economic, social, cultural partner to chart the future of Korea together. And this was revolutionary. And what happened after in 2000 with the summit of two leaders of both North Korea and South Korea was again something that radically changed the perception of South Koreans. What was before unthinkable became possible. And this event was something, again, that was planned and executed by the leaders of two Koreas themselves without the strong political sponsorship of foreign powers or a strong international shock, as that was the case with the 1972 July 4th communique during the Park Chung-hee government. And so I think again and again, all of these important changes were taking place. And unfortunately, as Jongdae already mentioned, with the Lee Myung-mak government, all of this changed. And it's interesting because Lee Myung-bak is someone who was very proud of being very pragmatic. And yet his policy to North Korea, which supposedly was very pragmatic, which turned out to be very actually not pragmatic. If you think about the fact that that really didn't bring about any intended results, and it was very punitive to North Korea. In fact, significantly reverted so many things that were taking place and so many accomplishments that was brought about. And so the relationship between South and North by 2011, when Jongdae visited North Korea, was very tense. And I think that we all have to remember one thing is that really the Sunshine Policy came about also from a very pragmatic point of view when everything else failed. And so this was considered to be the only solution. And Kim Dae-jung was very astute in terms of, he again and again, you know, people don't usually think of him as very pragmatic. He's usually known as very idealistic, and yet at the same time, he was pragmatic. Because for Kim Dae-jung and many other people who supported Sunshine Policy, this was the only possible solution to the problems that between the two Koreas. And obviously we have to factor the United States into this. You know, obviously there has to be the U.S. Agreeing to have peaceful resolution. So the U.S. obviously is also very, very important, and you know, it was the Bush declaring in 2002 the North Korea as axis of evil that in some ways played a big role and it became a big stumbling block toward the fulfillment of the Sunshine Policy. So let me just stop here. I don't want to go on too long, but that would be sort of a short historical context in which we would situate two visits of Jae Hwan and Jongdae in separate time period.
Yeah, thanks for helping us sort of zoom out and see this events and just like, yeah, understand this kind of in like a timeline and just like change in views and change in policies. And this sort of leads me into like a question. Maybe we can go further into just like how much, so you sort of pointed out like the Sunshine Policy as like first sort of like a policy that in Korean Peninsula that was kind of initiated without the influence of from the outside of Peninsula. And I'm curious what are the stakes and influences the foreign powers, or for example like the US has in regards to sort of shaping the Korean policies towards Korean Peninsula, or even just about like peaceful peninsula itself.
Should I go on, or maybe Jongdae can go first and I'll add later, or somebody else can go first?
I think Professor Namhee Lee is in the best position to answer this question, but like just to add my 2 cents before, you know, from my perspective of my grandfather, I think he always, I couldn't agree with you more when you said like the Sunshine Policy was like not just an ideal policy, but it was rather like very pragmatic policy, because to my grandfather, you know, like that was the only way. Because he used to say that, you know, without, you know, like other than dialogue or engaging in conversation, the only other option is war and conflict. So like to him, like that was the only practical solution to solving the crisis. But about the role of U.S., I think my grandfather emphasized a lot from the 70s how the four superpowers surrounding the Korean Peninsula are so like important to engage in the peace process of Korea, because peace in Korean Peninsula is not just the issue of Koreans. It's actually the issue of the region, and it's actually the issue of the world. So that is why from the 70s, he continued to, argue that, like we have to involve like Japan, US, China, and Russia in this process together. And I think that was kind of like crystallized like during the Roh Moo-hyun administration through the six-party talks. But one point that I think my grandfather used to like convince Clinton to buy into Sunshine Policy was that, even in the heights of Cold War, US always like engaged in dialogues with adversaries like China. So like Nixon engaged in conversation with China, and eventually like Chinese economy opened up. And also like while President Reagan always claimed Soviet Union to be the evil empire, still like he sought dialogue with Soviet Union. So like he always brought up those points.
Yeah, let me just add, just very briefly, just amplifying what just Jongdae said. If we remember, for example, the Secretary of State Albright, Madeleine Albright's visit to North Korea, and how that brief moment of meeting with Kim Jong-il also has significantly changed the perception of North Korea and North Korea's leader at the time in the United States. Is so very important, again, to have that kind of meetings of the leaders and have context. And as Jongdae mentioned, and President Kim Dae-jung has always emphasized the importance of obviously working with all these different foreign powers. U.S. obviously, because of its long-standing relationship with South Korea in terms of military, political, economic, in every way, that it is key in some ways to resolving again the current tension between the two Koreas. I think it's very, very important for U.S. to normalize the relations between North Korea and the US, not only because this is what North Korea has always demanded, but because, again and again, straight up, this is most pragmatic solution. There's really no other way to resolve all of the issues that we have on our hands without the United States normalizing the relations with North Korea. And as Jongdae has pointed out, it has normalized relations with China and with Vietnam, even though obviously more than 50,000 US soldiers were killed during the Vietnam War and so many more injured. Even after the brutal history, US managed to normalize relations, and there's really no reason why it shouldn't with North Korea.
Thank you both for just really going deep into the history and just like all the political underpinning behind this topic. And just to go back to the chat room, I'm seeing some hands and Q&As. Actually, we have a little section at the end for Q&A. We will answer the questions that we receive at the end. So we highly recommend everyone to write down your questions so that we can revisit them a little later. And I guess I sort of want to go back to the the comment that you made, Namhee, about just like the power of storytelling and art and image, and how like what I'm sort of hearing is just really about like how all these things are kind of shaping our reality, you know, like the policy towards mounting Kumgang and everything. But I'm curious, like, how is our image of North Koreans even shaped? Like, another thing that I was thinking about was like, oh, like I never actually like saw mounting Kumgang. Like, I'm pretty sure like very little people saw it, you know, the actual from South Korea or like in the Western world. And yeah, I just wanted to just sort of like throw that as like a topic for talk about like how are we imagining North Korea, like people in there and nature there, and how does it shape our sort of yeah, like the grander picture of this peninsula.
May I add? I think I want to kind of share how I was learning about the country and its people as being students back in South Korea. So I was educated till my high school period and then came to the US for my tertiary schools. So tracking back my memory, I know a lot of people in their 40s, 50s and above tend to share their education, something like what Jongdae mentioned earlier about having horns and red tails like evils about North Korean people. But in my generation, when I was younger primary student, that's when President Kim Dae-jung and Roh Moo-hyun administration fostered the public education on Korean reunification, which actually very well spread the humanized aspect of North Korean people, definitely emphasizing the oneness of Koreans. So I very vividly remember the participating to reunification themed writing and drawing contest at the time. But you know, it drastically changed the atmosphere entirely when the conservative Lee and Park Geun-hye became presidents around my high school period. So the peaceful relationships between the two Koreas enervated, very worsened, and more platforms for North Korean defectors to testify actually increased. So under Lee and Park, South Koreans' visits to North Korea were not allowed, but at the same time, the two Koreas' hostility very increased, skyrocketed. And meanwhile, very selected group of North Korean defectors and a lot of people who tend to insist themselves as experts in political think tanks and international organizations created a very prevalent discourse on North Korean human rights issues, which I can't say again, you know, it's true or not, because I never been to every part of North Korea, but definitely that discourse became very prevalent and it kind of shook everyone's mind to the public. So as many perceive, due to such very fluctuant history and policies, I would say North Koreans in North Korea tend to be understood as people who starve to death and need to be rescued, when not everyone may not be living under that circumstance. So that's how I perceived and then how I was educated when I was growing up.
I actually, I may be the oldest in the panel and spent my teen years in South Korea. I was educated in South Korea until I came to the States in my late teen. And I remember actually participating in a speech contest and art contest and writing contest. And actually in my fourth grade, the title of my speech was I Hate North Korea, which was modeled after this supposedly 10-year-old Lee Seung-bok, who apparently or reputedly shouted this when North Koreans infiltrated into Gangwon province in late 1960s. And so every, school would have this statue of 이승복 어린이, 나는 공산당이 싫어요, engraved in the statue. So I was a product of that education, obviously. So it's interesting that in some ways, each of us represent different era and different kinds of education of the South Korean educational system. I think one of the things that I wanted to talk about is to briefly go back to what John mentioned earlier, the power of storytelling. And in some ways, the power of sort of cultural production, such as films and such as what Jae Hwan has done with his video making. I remember in particular the film called the JSA that was released, which is the Joint Security Area, which was released in early 2000. And this was even before the summit of 2000 was announced. And so in some ways, that film, which talks about the unlikely friendship that takes place along the joint security area, through the nocturnal visits of the soldiers from south to north, and such, in some ways, unlikely story that the friendship could be formed between the soldiers of the two sides, in some ways anticipated what was going to happen in 2000 with the summit and subsequent sunshine policy. And so for me, this is very important point that again and again, engaging with this kind of cultural production anticipates something that used to be unthinkable before. And I think again and again, we really have to realize the potential that is in the kind of art making that again, many of you are engaged in. And so I think I'd like to again, sort of thank the organizers of this event, and John and Jae Hwan and Jongdae. I feel very honored to be participating in this very important panel. I should have started out my comment with that first. But anyway, before I forget, I wanted to interject that. So, actually, I do teach a course, an entire course on North Korea. And one of the reasons why I started this course was not necessarily because I am an expert on North Korea. In fact, I have no expertise because I haven't done any research whatsoever on North Korea per se. And this was prompted by the US invasion into Iraq in 2003, when there was this crisis. Some of us in academia, and obviously many other people, really felt that North Korea was going to be next target of the United States government. And I really, really felt that it was important to reach the students who's getting most of the information about North Korea from mass media, the mainstream mass media, and how, as we all know, the mass media has been in some ways responsible for spreading this very distorted and ahistorical image of North Korea and all of the issues that the Korean Peninsula is faced with. And so I really felt that it was important to reach those students and decided that I would offer this course, even though obviously my department or the university would consider it as a boutique course and not necessarily welcoming, I suppose, because it's not a huge class. So I think, again, the venues like this is also very, very important for, again, trying to provide alternative views of not just North Korea, but all of the issues that we're confronted with, because this is obviously the problems that we are confronted with are not just necessarily limited to Korea. And this is a problem that needs to be resolved for the peace of the Korean Peninsula and the entire world community. So we have a responsibility to, again, try to resolve the issues that confront the Korean Peninsula, and the responsibility to provide all different kinds of venues. So I'm not sure I don't think I'm responding to any of the questions, but
No, but like that makes me think about just like how important it is to be like informed and just having support, creating space, and continue talking this dialogue. And that makes me sort of think about these two scenes in the video, right? Like where we have this like scene with like inside the bathhouse where, you know, we're like all naked and you really don't know who's who. And that space, you like the, even like the narrator mentions that it like we all feel like, you know, one kind of person, but then like that space still sort of with that ignorance like functions under like fear, you know? Whereas like in the very last scene where narrator's mother just approaches the guide and make some small talks, and you know, connection happens, you know, like maybe and I sort of think about that, like about being like informed and just like knowing and just being curious, like how important that role is. And I had one question prepared to Jay as like a little surprise question, but I was really curious about the Rubik's Cube. If you could tell us more about that. I feel like it is a little bit about like what we all talked about, but it's like complex symbology there. So
that's interesting. Surprise, actually. That was one of the souvenirs that I purchased at the time. Unluckily, I was not able to find it back in my house in Korea, but I was able to repurchase similarly looking the fan that I also portrayed in the video through eBay, which is actually a souvenir from Kumgang, I think. So the cube, I think, has a lot of connotation to it, which a lot of audiences of my video found it very interested. Yeah, a lot of actually non-Koreans found it very intrigued because there's no, you know, particular Korean culture, you know, embedded to it. That it can also reflect back on their youth in America or in non-Korean countries. So I think that was kind of the kick moment for them to like dive back into the moment when they were young, probably.
okay, I think that was a good hefty length of conversation. Thank you so much, panelists. And we have one Q&A. I think this is a perfect time to open up for Q&A. Please send us questions through either the chat or Q&A function. But we have one which is really interesting. I'm going to like read in Korean and simultaneously sort of translate in English at the same time. 재환님의 작품을 다시 보는 건데도 감동이 큽니다. Really, it makes me emotional to watch your piece. 어린 시절의 방문 경험이 이렇게 예술로 승화되는 걸 보면서 그런 경험을 가진 아주 소수에 해당하는 재환님이 부러워요. So she's basically saying that it's like fascinating that you turned your childhood memory and experience into like an artwork, and also jealous that you had that exceptional sort of experience of being at the Mountain Kumgang. 어떻게 하면 한 사람이라도 더 경험하고 나눌 수 있는 기회를 만들 수 있을까요? So the question is, how can we make the world where like at least like one more person can like experience this?
Wow, great. This actually relates back to what you were talking about, I think you mentioned something about having experience and being curious about and also learning a lot about different aspects of North Korea or the current situation in the Korean Peninsula. So as an artist activist, I can actually speak from the aspect in the art field. Yeah, I'm not a political scientist or a historian. So I actually embody a lot of political agendas from different perspectives. So even if I was Namhee's student a year ago at UCLA, I also very ironically learned the history of Korean War first initially from the former CIA agent when I was learning Korean, US and Korean relations in Seoul National University when I was a college student in Chicago. So, you know, and that was quite conservative, I would say, politically speaking. And the other discourse was from Professor Bruce Cummings from University of Chicago, and also, you know, all other scholars, experts from different political backgrounds. So why I do that? Because I can't visit North Korea. I am curious about locations where I cannot visit as an artist. Artists always needs to be curious, I would say. So I try to create a public platform where I can help people be educated or share their discourses in an open platform. So I have founded an organization, a social practice organization called Humans of North Korea back in 2016 when the relationship really worsened at the time. And I felt that urgency because a lot of younger generations, especially Koreans, are very either indifferent or very sharing their hatred towards North Korea when we were not really educated about the country. As I mentioned earlier, we were never really educated about the Korean War because of the fluctuant situation of the history book situation in South Korea, which Namhee actually might have researched on probably. So I tried to create public fora as an artist as well. So I think that's how I was able to invite Professor Bruce Cummings a few years back. And then as an artist activist, I also create a lot of art works like the video that we watched, and also paintings, installation art, socially engaging art definitely helps me foster the discourse that I am talking about, etc. So that's my role as an artist, I would say.
May I ask Jongdae to speak more about the kind of work that that his organization is involved with? Would that be okay?
Sure, I'm happy to talk about that if it's not too off topic. But you know, I think in the essence, I think it connects in the essence because so my nonprofit is called Regeneration Movement, and the mission is to empower the global diasporas, meaning people who have left their homeland. So it is to empower the global diasporas to be the peacemakers and peace builders and change makers. So under that mission, we are currently very active in a town called Clarkston, which is, you know, the suburb of Atlanta. And it is a very unique town because more than half of its population is foreign born, because many of its population are resettled refugees from all over the world. So what we do in that town is we offer education programs for high school students. So we offer SAT prep classes as well as college mentoring groups and sessions. But at the same time, we also offer what we call Global Peace Building Academy. So here we talk about the values of being a global citizen and, you know, like what is human rights and etc. So it's more of a values class, but we offer that because, you know, the world that we're living in is such a, we are living in more and more pluralistic world, and our conflicts today occur because of that, you know, because the world is becoming a more diverse place. Even in South Korea, like we used to think of South Korea as a very homogenous country, but you know, like now I think about 5% of the Korean population is foreigners. And I think when 5% of the population is foreigners, that it is considered a multicultural society. So even in a homogenous society like Korea, like the dynamics is changing. But I think what we saw in the US with the rise of Trumpism and rise of nationalism all over the world can be a response to a pluralizing landscape. But I think as humanity, what we have to do is seek ways to peacefully coexist together. And I think this is where maybe it can connect to the theme of our conversation, is that, you know, and this is why, you know, we emphasize the global citizenship education for the lack of other models, is that, you know, because the realization that, you know, despite all our differences, we are in the end, like we are part of one human race. I think this realization is so important for everyone living this world, living this era, and it includes Koreans of how they look at each other. And I think this way, I think this framework is also important in engaging in the peace, engaging in peace of the Korean Peninsula, because again, as I said before, the peace of the Korean Peninsula issue is not only an issue of the Koreans, but it's a very global issue. So we need like global allies who would also kind of tackle this issue together to solve the peace issue as all together, not just the Koreans, but all together. So yeah, that is the work that I do. So, and that is how it connects to, you know, I guess my overall work of peace.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for asking.
Yeah, so we're sort of like kind of going around and talking about like the role that, like, you know, each of our sort of like field sort of has towards yeah, like what the question that like the artwork is sort of like giving us. And I wanted to ask you, like, this is kind of like a similar question, Namhee, about what do you see like the role of your sort of like discipline, just being like a historian? Like, how do you see like peace in Korean Peninsula, or just kind of like greater empathy, or building the greater empathy?
I mean, I guess one of the things that I mentioned before, which was to offer a course on North Korea, might be, you know, rather small act, but it was actually something that I consciously did again and again to reach the American students, university students, and in the hope that they will, again, when they leave the university, will leave with some historical understanding of the not only North Korea, but also the whole Korean peninsula and the history of two Koreas, and to become more responsible citizens of, again, not only the United States, but also the global community. And so I mean, obviously my role as an academic is very limited, but I think I try to sort of enlarge as much as possible what I can do within academia by, again, you know, making myself available in occasions such as this one, and to share my views with the broader audience. So I mean, obviously that's just not enough, but that's what I had, you know, I mean, at this point, I think that, I mean, I did try to sort of do something beyond that. I actually tried to convince the university to send UCLA students to North Korea as a part of a study abroad program, and that didn't quite work. You know, but we do have examples such as the case with Cuba. Many of the universities did send students and faculty to Cuba before the Obama's, what is it took many years ago, or some years ago, before the travel to Cuba became sort of normalized. So I think one of the things that we as a university and as academics can do is to sort of normalize the relationship between North Korea and the U.S. in ways that are you know, limited, but possibly sort of exchange programs between North Korea and the U.S. is something that I've been working on, although I can't really claim any success so far. So we'll see how that goes. But that's one of the things that I sort of envision myself working on continuously.
John, can I briefly add on something?
Yeah.
It actually relates to the travel ban the US is putting on its citizens right now. I actually wanted to emphasize, pinpoint the role of the civil society in the US because there are civil movements by diverse caucuses domestically in the US for a peaceful Korean Peninsula. So that's actually where Jongdae and I met first. I think it was last year. So last year, US Representative Ro Khanna supported numerous peace and political organizations to help their local representatives to co-sponsor House resolutions to end the Korean War and also to create a peaceful Korean Peninsula. So since the new term began this year, Congressman Brad Sherman in California actually introduced the Peace on the Korean Peninsula Act already. And while the introduction of House resolutions like the Divided Families Reunification Act also was introduced, and I think it's also passed. I think all these bills and policies in the US plays a very critical role, very in a bipartisan way. You know, we know that there are Korean American 4 congresswomen and congressmen in the US. They also have been very actively been engaged in creating these policies. And our role as citizens or constituents living in the US would be to urge your local representative to co-sponsor all those amazing bills together. So I wanted to shout out to all the organizer members who might be joining us tonight. And thank you for all the works you all are doing. And I'm very happy to be part of that movement, political movement as an artist as well.
Thank you so much. About just like all these inspiring ways and like different initiatives. It's really inspiring to hear. We have one more Q&A, and after this, I think we will wrap up. So I will read out. When and where are you creating these images? Time travel to childhood expressed in naive style, bright colors, and where is here and now where you want us to be, beholding these beautiful and moving images, wondering where art leaves off and activist cultural message about humanity of North Korea begin. Beautiful work, by the way. So I guess it's like more directed towards you, Jae.
Well, I don't know what I should answer. There's too many questions from Mr. Mike Steers. Well, this was actually very most artistic work that I've made as an artist. I think it resonates with a lot of audiences very interestingly, which was very experimental and very happy result that I'm receiving here. But before, it was very direct. I was just protesting, insisting that's just my politically driven art. But I think talking about my memory and using these images, kind of helping the audience to be part of the moment together, I think help them relate to my situation and my memory. I think that's my role as an artist as well. There are just so many ways that I can approach in impacting and sharing the discourse on North Korean issue or Korean Peninsula or issues in the Korean Peninsula. Actually, you raised the question, so I don't know what other questions were, John. Yeah, well, if you know, or.
Yeah, I guess it like sort of talked about like where the personal moments of the work like sort of turns into more political underpinning of what's happening in North Korea. I think, yeah, there was like observation slash question.
Right, actually being personal in my work is very important. So last year I created this interactive and collaborative piece with a North Korean defector who's living in Los Angeles. She wrote a letter to her mother who actually passed away in North Korea. And I also wrote a letter to my mother who I was not able to see for over a year. Actually, yeah, for a while actually, in South Korea. And then we juxtaposed, so I laid these letters on one side, and then I laid my collaborators' work on the other side, and we hung together. And then I let the audience read it at the same time. So I kind of talked about this younger Korean diaspora living in the US, experiencing different situation, different tonality in the letter, the message we're conveying through the letter. I kind of wanted that story to very naturally, bleed toward for the audiences in the piece. So I think collaboration plays a very important role in order for me to reflect my personal story as well. In a few weeks, actually, we'll be representing or working with a North Korean chef in LA. We'll be making a mandu all together in LA at the gallery. We'll be learning how to, the brief history of North Korean mandu. The chef actually used to work for a North Korean restaurant in Russia. And then that's how he, resettled in South Korea and also now in the US. Mandu, yes. So I think that kind of platform also will be important for the audience to be engaged and get to learn about the North Korean culture or the people.
Well, thank you, everyone. Wow, that was such an insightful, such a deep conversation. Thank you for all the panelists and the interpreter, everyone who attended this event. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for organizing this panel.